with that, we're going to get started. And tonight we have our first guest lecture. And this class was planned on purpose to be this way because how many people are going to the boat tour? Raise your hand if you are. I really wanted you to have the zoning lecture before we go on the river because I just think your eyes are going to be so much wider open when you understand zoning and when you see the types of uses and densities and transects. We're going to learn about that tonight that we're passing through on the river. So it's really going to open your mind. And there's a lot of, I just read an article about, I'm sure Rogelio knows about it, about the revitalization of the riverfront in Chicago. And then how that's really activating the city too. So although our boat tours of the Miami River waterfronts have been revitalized all over the country and all over the world, and they really revitalizing those waterfronts and making public access, which we'll also talk about tonight, has really added value to property. So that's some of what we're going to see on the river, but it's really a template not just for Miami, but for all over the world. So tonight, we have Rogelio Madan. He is, as of yesterday, he was just promoted, or he just got his new title, Chief of Community Planning and Sustainability with the City of Miami Beach. And he's joined the City of Miami Beach 3 years ago. I really like having Rogelio be my guest lecturer, not only because he's excellent, but because he used to work with the City of Miami. And he was very instrumental in implementing the new Miami zoning code, Miami 21. But with Rogelio, what we're going to get to see are, and also wanted you to take note, the City of Miami and the City of Miami Beach have different zoning codes because they're different municipalities. Just like all over the U.S., most cities have their own zoning code, or most counties. So if you have property in a particular municipality, you want to look at that zoning code. But tonight we're going to get an expert in both codes because he's instrumental in both of them. So he was, like I said, he was a planner with the City of Miami, planning and zoning for 7 years. Rogelio is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Central Florida in public administration with a minor in urban and regional planning, and his master's degree from Florida Atlantic University in urban and regional planning. He currently serves as the chairperson of the Miami-Dade County Planners Technical Committee. They once had a meeting in this room. While at the City of Miami, Rogelio participated in the development of Miami 21, the form-based zoning code, revamping the city's comprehensive plan, and the review of several of the city's major developments, many of which have been recently completed or are currently under construction. And you guys can see them while you're sitting in traffic on the way to get to class.
Tomorrow, Brickell City Center opens.
Yes.
Thursday,
Brickell City Center opens, and actually Friday we're having a representative from Brickell City Center who was able to join us at the last minute on the boat tour. So it's kind of exciting to be able to have him the day after the shops open at Brickell City Center. Currently at the City of Miami Beach, Rogelio is working to update several sections of the city's zoning ordinance to improve the quality of development and required to be resilient against the impacts of sea level rise, to collaborate with consultants on a master plan for North Beach area of the city, and to streamline the city's permitting processes. He's also worked on establishing master plans for several city parks, worked with consultants to establish a master plan to encourage the revitalization of Washington Avenue, and to update zoning ordinances to require more sustainable development practices. So welcome, Rogelio. That sounds pretty serious. Can you tell us a fun fact?
It's fun.
About you, yeah.
Strong's costumes.
I was the Riddler for Halloween, and my friends, we were all Batman villains on Saturday. So we had the Joker, Catwoman, Poison Ivy, Harley Quinn, and that's it. So,
Yeah. Cool. So, okay, well, welcome. Come on down and join me. So we're going to get started talking about zoning. And let's see, in today's class we're going to learn about the government power to regulate and take property for public use. We're going to talk about Supreme Court cases, We're going to talk about what a public use is, and we're going to talk about what Florida has done in response to some of those cases, and examples of zoning, like I said, in the city of Miami and in Miami Beach. So I'd like somebody to come up and write something on the board for me. Who wants to do it? Yeah. Ross is doing good in class participation. He really is. Let me look for a marker. Yeah, here we go. Okay, you can write it up there. Okay, it's kind of like what you wrote before, what somebody else wrote before. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
Hold on.
Okay. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So that's number 5, right? And so we see up there again, life, liberty, and property. They can't kill you. They can't take away your freedom, throw you in jail. And they can't take away your property without this thing we call due process. Can you underline that word, due process? And it says, nor shall private property be taken for public use, if you can underline that. Public use. Okay, so then if you could go over to this side and write, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And all that he put on the board were my favorites, right? 5 and 14. Everybody knows those are my favorite parts of the U.S. Constitution. And some people in their homework, they were referencing other parts. Really all I'm looking for when you reference the Constitution is 5 and 14, the part that deals with property, and the preamble of the Constitution. So thanks, good job, right? So now I wanted to talk a little bit. Oh, that's 5, and then here's 14. So thanks, Ross, for putting it up and also slowing us down while we read it. So I want to talk a little bit about that case called the Village of Euclid. Who wants to tell me what happened in that case? What year was it?
Year, I don't remember.
The year is really important. Around a basic year. 1920s, right? Okay. Let's see.
22.
It says 1926 is when the decision came down. So, okay. Okay, this is the first thing. If your case gets all the way up to the Supreme Court, it had to go through the lower courts first. So it normally takes a couple years for it to get heard and decided by the Supreme Court. So that's why you think it's 22, but actually it's 26 because the decision came down in 26. So what happened in that what were the facts of Euclid? What happened in Euclid?
Like, the story was based in China. So the police the government came over.
That's a different article. That's the Wall Street Journal article, and that was on your homework, and we're going to go over that later. But this is the Supreme Court case called the Village of Euclid.
Okay, so Euclid, Ohio, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Euclid, I guess.
Ohio's been there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, planners go there.
It's like the Mecca, I guess, of zoning, right? Is it-
It's where, it's where it was, it originated in New York City, but that's where it was given legal status.
Yeah.
But don't tell them yet. I want to hear, so what is this about? So what happened?
So basically, there were these zoning laws, right? One of the first ones, I'm assuming, and it was all depending on, you know, whether you had a factory, whether you had a single-family home, a two-family home, whatever, and it basically created like a barrier to entry for certain people, companies, or types of stores, whatever, to come into Euclid, and basically it discriminated against these type of people. And
Well, let's have, who wants to be Mr. Ambler? Okay, Sebastian. So you're Mr. Ambler. So why did you want this case to go all the way up to the Supreme Court? What happened?
From what the Doodle was saying,
Mm-hmm. So if you're Mr. Ambler, what happened to you?
I was discriminated against.
Why?
The type of
No. Who wants to be Mr. Ambler? Okay, so you can be Mrs. Ambler. Okay, so what happened to you, Mrs. Ambler?
If I'm reading this correctly, he already had property.
You're gonna be him.
Okay.
You're gonna be her.
I remember correctly. There was 68 acres that was already in my possession, and the city came and adopted ordinance that restricted the use of my land. And so I
That
couldn't.
make you mad?
Of course it does. Now my land's worthless. I can't do what I want to do with it, and that's not fair. They can't do that.
Worthless? Or now, is it worthless, or is it now you can only do certain things?
I'm limited in what I can do. I don't have my freedom to do what I want with
That
it.
sounds really unfair, doesn't it? Why would they do that to you in the 1920s?
Because they came up with this zoning classification of how they wanted things done, and that's all fine and good, but my property was already there first.
So for what reason did you sue? For what reason? What did you want to find out?
Basically because I can't use the property the way I want to use it. I'm being restricted from using it the way I want to. It's farmland, right?
No, that's not that one. Yeah, over there.
Also, zoning laws weren't really put in place until 25 years ago. So
25 years ago, when? But what year was 25 years ago from that case?
Yeah, 1920.
No, that case was in 1926.
Right.
So,
So 25 years. Yeah. So
So-
from 1926.
what year was that?
1901.
1901. So Mrs. Ambler here's had this property for a long time, and then all of a sudden they're putting in these zoning laws, right? And what's her legal question? I bet it has something to do, and it's probably well, it's not why I chose the case, but it does have something to do with my favorite amendments, doesn't it? What's her legal question?
I'm being deprived of the use of my property without due process.
No, the question is, and this is what the city asked, is, it says, and it's on page 3. This doesn't have page numbers, but I would number your pages, and it's actually the underlined part of the case on page 3. And you can read it if you want to, Gail, or Mrs. Ambler.
Thus, the question whether the power exists to forbid the erection of a building of a particular kind or for a particular use, like the question whether a particular thing is a nuisance, is to be determined not by an abstract consideration of the building or of the thing considered apart, by considering it in connection with the circumstances and the locality.
Actually, that's part of the question, but really, the question in this case is what? They're not taking the land. What's the question? The question is, does it, oh, what do you have?
Wait, isn't this person mad because like if they want to sell it, it's
She's
or
mad.
she's mad because if they want to like sell the land, it's like restricting like who can buy it and
Well,
the
now,
value of the land is
right.
like,
Yeah, Desi.
Isn't the question basically, can they really dictate what I can do with my land?
The question is,
Is that taken?
does this violate the 5th and actually, does it violate the 14th Amendment for the state to enact zoning laws? That's the question. And that was the question on certiorari. And certiorari is a legal term. And do you think the Supreme Court hears every single case that comes up to it?
No.
No, they don't. So what the Supreme Court tries to do is they try to hear cases that have a question, that are going to answer a question on a national level, right? So certiorari is it's a legal term of art, and at common law, it was a writ or order issued by the Chancery or the King's Bench, commanding officers of inferior courts to submit the record of a cause pending before them to give the party more certain speedy justice. That was back in England, where, you know, if you were the king, you could own property. And today, what it is it's a writ of a superior appellate court issued in its discretion to an inferior court, ordering it to produce a certified record of the case it has tried in order to determine whether any irregularities or errors occurred that justify review of the case. Certiorari is a device used by the Supreme Court of the U.S. to select the cases it will review. So this case in Euclid had to go through the lower courts before the Supreme Court said, you know what, it is the 1920s. And I think they said that we're in modern times. I don't know if somebody wants to read me that. We're in modern times in the 1920s. And I bet a lot of people around the country were asking the same question, right? So let's see what did the Supreme Court say about the timing of this decision? You can, if you find it. Here, I'll help you. It's underlined. It says building zone laws.
Building zone laws are
Slow.
Building zone laws are of modern origin. They began in this country about 25 years ago. Until recent years, urban life was comparatively simple, but with the great increase in concentration of population, problems have developed and constantly are developing, which require and will continue to require additional restrictions in respect of the use and occupation of private lands
In urban
communities.
So they thought that urban life was getting complicated back in the 1920s, right? What was happening in the 1920s? What was the new thing in the 1920s?
Cars.
The cars, right? So cars have a lot to do with this type of zoning, and this is called Euclidean zoning, and we'll talk about it. I want to show you guys an image, and I want to see what you think about it. So, what does a pig in a parlor have to do with the Supreme Court? With this case?
Just say that some things belong in some places and others in
So
others.
let's read it. It's in the case. Who wants to read it? This case is pretty short. Yeah. Yeah.
A nuisance may be merely a right thing in the wrong place, like a pig in the parlor instead of the barnyard.
So the Supreme Court says a nuisance, that just because there's a type of use, it doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it means it could be in the wrong place. So they're using the idea of a pig in a parlor to explain that. Why, Mrs. Ambler, all the uses that you might want to use your property for aren't allowed anymore, right? And what about this idea of the elasticity of the Constitution? What does that mean? Yeah.
The times change, and I guess the Constitution has to adapt to change, but not like immediately. It has to do gradually.
So where does it say it in the case? Where does it mention that elasticity in the case?
says, but
loud.
but although a degree of elasticity is thus imparted, not
No, start at the paragraph before where it says while.
while the meaning of constitutional guarantees never varies, the scope of their application must expand or contract to meet the new and different conditions which are constantly coming within the field of their operation. In a changing world, it is impossible that it should be otherwise. But although a degree of elasticity is thus imparted, not to the meaning but to the application of the constitutional principles, statutes, and ordinances which, after giving due weight to the new conditions, are found clearly not conform to the Constitution, of course must fall.
So what does that mean? That the Constitution is elastic. The Supreme Court saying that the Constitution is elastic. What does it mean?
It means that the meaning has to change.
Yeah, the names aren't like black and white. So there's like in between where you can actually like perceive, I don't know.
Change with the times.
Yeah.
Change with the times, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that a lot of things, the laws do change with the times, right? There's some laws that are able to be interpreted broadly, which is what we're seeing with elasticity. But then when we have the class on residential landlord tenant, we'll see that that law is pretty much not elastic. It's very, the judges require that it be followed very specifically. But in this case, they're saying that the law is elastic, right? It can change with the times. Although there wasn't zoning before, now there can be zoning, right? But Mrs. Ambler, she's saying the ordinance, I don't like this ordinance, these zoning ordinances, because the 14th Amendment of the Federal Constitution, because it is depriving me of my liberty and property without due process of law, and it's denying me equal protection of law. And that's not fair. And they're saying that just because we have a new zoning, because zoning is new, doesn't mean that it's depriving her of her rights. What do you think would happen if a new zoning code was passed now? Do you think that the zoning department would have to send out notices to people, or based on this case, they wouldn't?
They would.
They would. And Rogelio was involved in that process when he helped enact Miami 21. They had about 5 or 6 years of public meetings and sent all kinds of public notices out so that people wouldn't feel that their due process wasn't followed. So we're going to see a lot of that as we go through this. But so what was the question in this case was what?
Whether the 14th Amendment could be applied after?
No, it's do zoning laws violate, does a municipality's enactment of zoning laws violate the 14th Amendment? And what was the holding, the legal decision? What was the legal decision?
They don't.
Right, exactly. When you have a question on certiorari, you're just asking the question, do zoning laws, does the city's enactment of zoning laws violate the 14th Amendment? And the holding was no, the city's enactment of zoning laws does not violate the 14th Amendment. So what do you guys think about that case? Ms. Ambler would probably be pretty upset, right? What do you think, Ms. Ambler?
Maybe I'm not reading this correctly. Doesn't it say that this was reversed? And it says decree reversed at the end.
It means that the lower court was in favor of you, and the Supreme Court reversed the lower court's decision. So you're what they would call SOL. Because you had a final determination by the final court of the United States. There's nowhere you can appeal it to.
Right.
But the decision wasn't just about Ms. Ambler. The decision decided precedent around the whole country that when a municipality enacts zoning laws, that those are okay. And that's why Rogelio went to the Mecca of Euclid, Ohio, right?
Yeah, it was on the way to Cleveland.
All right, that's why he went there. But so, okay.
But yeah, no, definitely, yeah, I wanted to get a picture. Thanks to Euclid, I have a job.
Yeah. So, so Euclid, what is Euclidean zoning? What did Euclidean zoning do?
Euclidean zoning is separation of uses. So back then, another thing that you had going on was the Industrial Revolution. So you had factories popping up everywhere next to places where people lived. So you were breathing, they didn't have pollution control. So people lived breathing in soot, breathing in pollution, working next to terrible conditions, and then living in those terrible conditions. So it was providing for a very unhealthy lifestyle. So Euclidean zoning was separate the uses, put the factories here, residents live here where it's quiet, you put the commerce, which is also loud and busy, in another place. Thanks to the car now, it's easy to get between these three areas. You also had streetcars back then to get between the areas. And so you separate uses based on that concept. So
So
it
they
improves
had-
safety, health, public health, safety, and welfare.
The idea was schools were in one place, houses of worship in another place, single-family homes in another place, shopping in another place. But in Euclidean zoning, what do you need?
Car.
You really need a car. And it came about when cars were just getting introduced. So we're going to contrast, when we get to it, we're going to contrast, I'm looking for my mic, I'm not sure if it's, oh. We're going to contrast Euclidean zoning with form-based zoning, which is the type of zoning that we have here in 2016, almost 100 years later, in the city of Miami. But we're going to do that when we get to it. First, we have to go through a little bit more of what's going on in the Supreme Court. So next we're going to go to the Kello case. What year was the Kello case? What?
78?
1978? 2005, right, exactly. Yeah, 2005. So who wants to be Suzette Kello in this case? You want to be, okay, Arturo. Do you know what Suzette, how she feels? What's going on with her?
Yeah, I'm getting,
Okay, well tell us about Suzette. Yeah, what's going on?
I'm petitioning, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Well just tell us the facts. What happened?
so the city of New London, or the township of New London, along with these developers are trying to basically put together a massive,
Yeah.
a big development along with Pfizer, where they're going to have like riverfront, retail, basically a massive undertaking.
Why do they want to do it?
Because New London is struggling compared to the other towns and cities in New Jersey, I think it is, in Connecticut. Connecticut, yeah. And yeah, I mean it's basically a failing township. So I think they were accepted 2 municipal bonds. The first one for $5 million, the second one for $10 million. And with that money, they were going to use I think the first one to bring a park, and the second one, I think, for part of this development. And in doing so, they had to basically enact eminent domain.
We're skipping over some big facts here. Was it the city that was taking the property?
Yes.
No.
No? Oh no, it was Pfizer.
The developer.
It
Who
was,
else wants to be in the Kello family? Or Kello? Who wants to tell us? You want to tell us, Demetria? Okay. So what was happening?
The city supposed, they were going to develop the place, supposedly, and they wanted to take the properties in different areas. And Mrs. Suzette Kello refused to give the property.
No. We're skipping over something. Madeline, do you know what it is we're skipping over?
I mean, it's a developer. It's not.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So the city,
But you
that
said
a
it's a public
developer,
use, so it's gonna change the
the
community.
city is allowing a developer to develop, right? And Mrs. Kello, you guys are Arturo and Demetria, you're in the Kello family. They would pay you for your property. Why don't you want to sell it?
Yes, because it has a waterfront view, and I've made a lot of improvements to my property, and I value it much higher than.
And what about your neighbor Wilhelmina? What about her property? She's joined in the lawsuit with you. Why doesn't she want to sell hers? And she's in the case. Why doesn't Wilhelmina want to sell it?
I think it's for the same reason.
Born and raised in the house.
Wait, Gail got it, right?
Yeah, she's born and raised in the house
She's
of the
born
one.
and
yeah.
raised in that house.
She's
been
80
there
years
for
old.
7 years. And you guys want to, who wants to be the city here? Who wants to be our, okay, Madeline. And you want to kick out, Carlos family and Wilhelmina, the 7-year-old?
Yeah, we want to make money. We want to change the community. We want to, make it a better place.
And Desi's your developer. Desi's the developer over there, right? So you gave Desi the authority to develop this, right? And Desi, how do you feel about kicking this family out? The Kellos have a waterfront view, and Wilhelmina's been there for 87 years.
I mean, my opinion is if it's a township that's fading and this
You're the
development.
developer.
Right, if this development is gonna help revive the township, technically isn't it public use?
It's going to create new jobs.
Right. It's gonna do a lot for the public.
So that's the question, right? Kello family, what was the question? Why did you sue? What was the question?
So they were,
Whether, what?
I was gonna say,
Whether or not it,
what they saying that they was taking the property because part of it was blighted, but her property wasn't, her thing producing it.
Her property she was living in, it wasn't blighted.
So they was they was going for one thing, but they were taking property that was actually operating as
And who was the they again?
I think between the city and the
It was the developer, private developer, right, okay, yeah.
Were they basically saying, is economic development considered public use?
Well, I want to hear from the Kello family, what you guys
yeah,
say?
it's essentially that. What is this really considered public use?
Yeah,
You know,
so now we see these words up here, right? We're back in the 14th Amendment because the state's trying to take it. It says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Oh, and then this one, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. But doesn't everybody know what public use means?
No.
What do you guys think public use is?
It's ownership by the government, apparently, something that the government will take to own, like public use, like I translate the Constitution like that, if I read it exactly, the word. But I think it's more broad, so maybe an airport that accommodates people, maybe consider public use later.
What do you think, Dave?
Isn't that when the government builds, for example, an airport, a school,
But this
government
isn't
building?
the government.
Well, developer building something for the
So a
government.
developer. So now we're saying a developer can come in and eminent domain your property, they can just kick you out because the developer wants to build something.
And they were hired by the government directly.
What do you guys think public use
190
means?
acres that are beautiful. We will walk. We're gonna have a lot of things. We have different shows. You have to see the render. It's gonna be beautiful.
But what do you think it means? Do you think public use means that everybody can go there and spend as much time as they want?
Yes.
But this wasn't going to be like that. The purpose of this wasn't for that. I think it was to put like offices in a hotel for Pfizer. So it wasn't for the public. It wasn't for like, remember when we saw everybody in the comment in that video? It wasn't for everybody.
I think like her part exactly was going to be in the area where there was the Research and Development Center, which is going to be all offices now. Or was that
Right, it was going to be where, it wasn't going to be for everybody. Does he?
I mean, my interpretation of it is, it doesn't have to be for everybody, but it has to benefit the public as a whole. So just
So
because,
you think that's what they meant in the Constitution?
that's how I would interpret it, yeah. For
Even
public
if
benefit.
you weren't the developer in this scenario?
Yeah, that's.
What do you think?
I mean, I agree with Desi, simply because if there's a comparative analysis done and the commission believes that it's gonna add property value to the community surrounding it, I don't see why not, it wouldn't pass the due process of law as well as basically, I mean, adding additional value to that particular community.
So
And
you're
I
just
see
gonna
it's
knock
perfectly
out,
fine.
so So the Kellos had a whole bundle of sticks, you're just gonna wipe it out because?
I mean, yeah, unless there's like a non-conforming use where like they're able to be grandfathered in after like the community agrees on like basically like certain like after variance
What do you
and
think,
things like
Martin?
that.
I don't think that makes sense because imagine how the use of like, I'm gonna take your house so it benefits this house.
No, but they were
But
gonna
the
have
zoning-
like shopping centers, restaurants, like a state park, so that is like public use.
Yeah,
Like
like-
if you wanna go eat, you can go there.
And if the developer has like certain dedications that he wants to include and things like that.
No, but public use isn't like free, it's just like a public thing.
What do you think, Lorenzo? What do you
Nah, I was
think?
really though. It's like, I guess if I was in a situation, I wouldn't care about the shopping centers and other people who use my property.
But also, wouldn't you say, and they should be following the US Constitution? How in
It's
the
my
world
property,
can
I
you
can
guys
just take
come
it
in
as
here?
public
Desi,
use.
the developer, just gonna come in and knock you out?
Yeah.
And
give me
say,
what you
and he's
consider
gonna
just
call
public
it,
use.
he's gonna call it public use, but that's not really public
I
use,
guess
right?
what I'm pissed about is is that they're gonna take away my house and then someone else is gonna make money off of my property.
Yeah,
You know?
that's exactly what's gonna happen, yeah.
Okay, but the thing is that the township is fading, that's the bottom line. This is adding jobs, this is probably gonna also add tourism, so it is for the public benefit, and you're mad, but you're receiving.
I'm
good
a salty old lady.
Exactly.
It's my property.
But where does it stop?
So what did the court decide here?
What do you want, more money?
And
Decide
on
what
page
they say
six,
and cannot place
yeah,
there.
Johnny.
We keep taking into account like the feelings of the individual versus the feelings of the public. But I think if we're taking the starting point of the amendment as are given, it's irrelevant to feelings, then it's just about defining what public use, what the reason for public use overriding private property would be. And if in a
But
case
why
where,
didn't the guys who wrote the Constitution, it was guys at that point in time who wrote it, why didn't they tell us what they
well, they
meant
did,
when they
they
said
defined it
public
right
use?
here. And what you said, they did right here. We just need to define what they said.
Why didn't they tell us what they meant? What does
They
public
did.
use mean?
So that's what I want to suggest. What I'm suggesting is that if we're taking as a given that when it's used by the public, that would be a case inclusive, and our question is, does it extend? In
Right,
this
that
case,
is a question.
I think we just need to define it, and it will actually be the reverse, because if to take a private person's property and make it used by the public, the only reason why there would be basis for that is because we're taking the given that allowing the public to have access to something or allowing the public to have benefit overrides a particular person's concerns. So if we're looking on a global level, we're going to take public benefit over a personal benefit.
But they didn't say public benefit.
Or public use. What would the benefit of use be if not for the sake of giving benefit? Otherwise, why would we care to have public use?
But if they wanted to say public benefit, why didn't they say public benefit?
Okay, that's a good question. But I think I didn't think about that. It's a good question. But the fact that it says public use, if we define the reason for that to override private property, it would probably come down to the fact that now the public, everybody equally is going to get impacted by this. In which case, to have economic benefit would be a way deeper reason, a way greater weight, and a way greater drive to take away this personal property and give it to the public or public use.
Okay. Good point, Ross. What do you think?
I don't know if this does it with a question, but like Marlins Park, that area was eminent domain for public use. A sports organization like the Florida Marlins is a private organization that's for profit. How are, stadiums and arenas and what have you considered public use when the money from that's still been into an individual pocket? And frankly, there were probably more people living in that area than on any given day somebody attending one of those games. So, I don't understand, how that, like the sports, establishments, how they can consider that public use. I mean, it's for public
I think
benefit.
that was the orange rule before, so I don't think it is eminent domain for that stadium in particular.
I don't think so.
But the
I
city
think
owns
there
it.
were like a whole bunch
But
of
I don't want
things
to get
that-
way off. I want to stay in the case right now because we haven't gone into
That's what I
the
said, I
case
didn't know
yet.
it was the right time to
And,
bring it
like,
up, but
and I want
that
you
was-
guys, like, when you think of questions to write them down because I want to stay in the case. But part of this class is, learning to read very particularly. So, on page 6, it says, we granted certiorari. And what does certiorari mean again? We decided to hear this case. We're real busy at the Supreme Court, right? we decided to hear this case to determine whether a city's decision to take property for the purpose of economic development satisfies the public use requirement of the Fifth Amendment. So what was the question that they're trying to figure out?
They do that.
Determine if this project is really public use.
No, the question is, remember, the question the Supreme Court is asking is always the broad question. It's not specific to the facts because they're trying to make the rule nationwide. So they're saying, does this amendment does not say economic development anywhere in it? Does public use, those two words, do they really mean economic development? Does it really mean that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for economic development without just compensation? So that's the question. And what was the holding? What did they decide?
Yeah, they can do that.
They said, yeah, economic development is consistent with the public use.
So now what's the answer to the question you asked me?
What?
Why does it say use, not benefit?
There is no answer. We're going to see what happened around the nation after this case. So what, I want to go through more of the case though.
But I don't understand how that
Couldn't Keelan try to get more money? Or enjoy it like kids?
But she didn't want the money. She wanted her home. There's an idea in real estate that every piece of property is unique. And she wanted her home. And, you know, Wilhelmina, the 87-year-old, wanted her home, right?
What would John Locke have done?
What would John Locke think? What would he think? What do you guys think he would think?
With $1 million, she can be serious.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah.
All they would have done is sell the house.
She can feed her cats forever.
What did this project, they did, so the Supreme Court said that what? The economic development satisfies the public use doctrine. Did this project get built? Did the houses get knocked down or did they get taken? So this project didn't get built.
I think some of them got moved.
Yeah, well, we're gonna watch the video. But on page 18, what they said was, yeah, who was the city, Madeline? You told us you were gonna do all this stuff. Why didn't you do it? And then you're gonna take somebody's private property?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, what do they do in that situation? Like, if they come out, they don't even do like what they said they're gonna do.
They get paid.
Yeah.
So, here, who wants to read this part where it says justice we decline? You wanna read it, Kareem?
Just as we decline to second guess.
You guys read loud for everybody. Yeah.
Just as we decline to second guess the city's considered judgments about the
Efficacy, yeah.
of its development plan, we also decline to second guess the city's determinations as to what lands it needs to acquire in order to effectuate the project. It is not for the courts to oversee the choice of the boundary line, nor sit and review on the size of the particular project area. Once the question of the public purpose has been decided, the amount and character of land to be taken for the project and the need for a particular tract to complete the integrated plan rests in the discretion of the legislative branch.
So what are they saying there? What does that mean?
They're basically just deciding if it's can be like public use. What happens after that is like not their problem.
No, I think they just wiggled out of it. Whose problem is it?
Legislative
And who's in the legislative branch? Who's made up of the legislative branch? What?
Oh no, I was gonna say, if you were asking about legislation, I thought, yeah, they make the laws.
How do those people get to make the laws?
Well, if it's a zoning commission, it's appointed people by, they're appointed by people that are, I mean, what's the word? Not representatives, that are like, people that can, yeah.
No, he doesn't appoint people actually. He doesn't. So who gets to make the laws? Lawmakers. How do they get their jobs?
Voted
We brought them in, so the Supreme Court just wiggled out. They said, you know what, you guys don't like this decision? You don't like that we said that the Constitution really meant economic development instead of public use? Go take it up with your legislators. Go vote. go elect some people who are going to do something about it. Do you think somebody in Florida who's kind of well known did something about it?
Yeah.
Who was it? Who was it?
That's not my Scott, are you?
No. Mm-mm.
Not everywhere.
Who was it? I don't know. They're not calling me. I don't know who was it that did something about it? And they did things about this. Legislatures all around the country did things about it because people who believe in property rights were very upset by this case.
Was it Flagler?
What?
Flagler? No.
2005.
Oh,
2005. Somebody with presidential aspirations.
Oh, Marco
Yeah,
Rubio.
Marco Rubio. So let's talk about what he did.
So they, after the Kelo case was decided, the state legislature, when he was the Speaker of the House of Florida Representatives, enacted a law saying that eminent domain had to be used specifically for infrastructure, so roads, schools, airports, electrical utilities, parks, true public use properties. And then additionally it says if the property is taken and they don't do anything with it, the previous owner has the right to first refusal to buy it back.
I keep losing my
From the
mic.
government.
Where's my mic?
Right.
Oh, thanks.
Sure.
So you guys start.
So you can't use it for economic development as the Supreme Court.
But Donnie said that now the Supreme Court says that this is economic development, right? That was the holding, right? So how could Marco Rubio pass a law that says economic development is too broad? It's not really that. How could he do that?
They gave the states the out and let them be more restrictive than what the Constitution allows you.
So that's what they did in this case. They actually said it in the case. They said, and we just read it, right? Look, Lorenzo, right? Because I'm reading your Kareem name. Lorenzo just read it. He just said, once the question of public purpose has been decided, the amount and character of land to be taken for the project and the need for the particular tract to complete the integrated plan rests in the discretion of the legislative branch. So basically, the Supreme Court saying you don't like the decision, vote for people who would make it more restrictive in your state. Why do some people make a cartoon of this when they talk about the Kelo case? What does it mean?
That the Supreme Court has no power? Like, well, that they just don't care?
People have no rights.
No, it meant that a lot of people thought that the Supreme Court just threw away, right, the guarantees of the Constitution. And they felt that, what is public use, public benefit? Does it mean open to the public? These guys are saying it doesn't, right? And then I wanted to also go to show you a little bit more about where we just saw how the Supreme Court punted to the legislature, but they wanted to make it even more clear. So then what did they, I'm turning this off, it's not my guest lecture. Then what did they say in 19? Do you want to read it again, Lorenzo? It starts on right after little 21.
We emphasize that nothing in our opinion precludes any state from placing further restrictions on its exercise of the takings power. Indeed, many states already impose public use requirements that are stricter than the federal baseline.
So what are they saying? Pretend you're the Supreme Court Justice. What are you saying?
Pretty much we can't stop any states from placing further restrictions.
I mean, that's a legal talk. What are you thinking? Like, what are you saying when you're telling all the states here? What are you saying to them?
You restrict, you can fix it.
What?
Because you restrict, so I sit at such a broad position, I can't really control what's happening in your state. So
You want to take this out?
Yeah. So they're really saying you guys go deal with it, for your states. What do you guys think? This was fair? The case was fair?
Where's it in?
What?
Where does it end?
Yeah.
You could arguably say that any parcel could be taken for a public use because it would generate more money for, you know, the local
Taxes,
area.
right?
But not in Florida.
Not in Florida. And I hope I pulled the right law. I think that it is the law that he passed in Florida. I think that maybe it was, I have it. I think it's 70, well, this is the eminent domain statute in Florida. It's, it's 73.013, if you guys want to take a look at it. It's not going to be on your exam or anything, but every state has an eminent domain statute. So we have people joining us from, online from a variety of places. And they can take a look at their state statutes on eminent domain. But now I want to play you a little video that was actually made about the Susan Kello case. Suzette Kello. And sometimes I have difficulty, so I hope I can make the sound.
Redevelopment agency's gone.
What do you guys think about that? Yes.
I have a question about tips and investment.
Okay.
Okay, so say no shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So which means with just compensation, the government can take your house without your agreement. Is that right?
No,
No, it's both.
No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And then it says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So, it means they have to do both. They have to give you due process if they're gonna take, property, and they also have to give you just compensation. So they did pay her, but
Yeah.
she didn't want the money. She wanted her house where it was.
Yeah, but they still take her house.
Wait, they still took her house.
Yeah, but I mean, she didn't want to sell his house,
No.
not her house. So I mean, so it means you can, the government can take your house without your agreement. If they
No,
they
it
will.
doesn't say without your agreement. It says they have to give you notice, which the due process means notice, legal notice, a lot of legal notices. There's a whole process. If you go to the Florida eminent domain statute, you'll see the process. It's a very, have you ever eminent domain the property, or that what we're gonna talk about?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's never been used by any city I've worked. Usually we've been able to buy the property beforehand.
Sometimes cities threaten it, and then in Miami, a lot of times it's really a question of money. But that's not what it is everywhere. Some people really want that property. Like, you imagine, Suzette wanted it, but she was the named plaintiff for a group of plaintiffs. You imagine that woman, Wilhelmina, 87 years old, really wanted that place. They can't force you to sell, but they can go through due process, which is a legal proceeding, and then they will establish just compensation via an appraisal and things like that. But it's normally they pay a lot more than the property's worth, and they also pay the legal fees of the person whose property they're taking. So normally the person ends up in a good position financially, but the whole idea of the U.S. is that your property can't be taken by some king or somebody who's related to somebody or somebody who has a better connection, and that's kind of what happened in this case, right? So even though that's the precedent of this case, the states around the nation tightened it, so it couldn't be as egregious as this taking was.
And we usually try to buy the property in an agreeable manner where both parties agree, because the eminent domain process will probably end up with you getting a lot more money and takes a lot longer.
Okay, so how to define the just compensation?
How do they define? We can look in the statute to see how it's defined. I need some help getting out of here. Let me see.
We usually don't go to eminent domain.
Well, if you guys look, so it's Florida Statute Chapter 83. It wasn't assigned as part of your reading, I don't think. But if you want to know more about eminent domain, there's some lawyers that's all that their practice is eminent domain. You can go to Florida Chapter 873. It says the procedure. Let's see. Process. Here they have one: taking of a property to eliminate a nuisance, a slum, or blight conditions prohibited. Right? That's what was. I think Marco Rubio is part in there. You get a hearing. Let's see.
That kind of what happened with Grand Avenue.
Private.
That was just both privately bought.
I remember by 2004 when 826 was expanded, the houses by the east area of 826, there was an amendment because they were expanded Palmetto. And so basically they pay 3 times the house market for the owners. And of course the realtors bring on the door, we get the houses and we sell to the city. And then we collect more money. Well, they collect money.
Yeah.
So, I think just compensation would be defined in here. I can look for it and get you the definition, but it's a procedure to get to just compensation. It's appraisers meet together, and then there's actually a formula where they give more than the appraiser says to give, and it's different in each state. But I can look for that definition for you in the state of Florida.
Okay, so the compensation is just concerned about the market value, or
Well, just compensation, it's not like saying, oh, you're just going to get compensation. It's a legal term of art, just compensation, and it actually has a technical definition. So the lawyers would have to go through the technical definition. It's normally more than the property is worth, much more. And we're going to talk about a case of that Rogelio brought, and we're also going to see a case of that on the Miami River. Because it's very, very serious, right? When the government is taking away somebody's property rights. Remember, we were talking about that lousy lien. The lien holder had to go through almost 2 years, the bank, to get the money back from the person who is not repaying the mortgage. And the person got the money and the property. And it's because it's taken very seriously to take property back, to use the government to take property. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, what happens if a property is being taken by a municipality, and this person bought the property, like let's say before the recession, and they lost a ton of money, and the property is being taken like right after in 08 or 09, you know, and they lost, let's say 50% of their equity. You know what happens in a case like that?
It would still follow the formula, the legal definition of just compensation.
I mean, what I guess to back off what he's saying, he's basically saying that like they're underwater on their mortgage property. So even if they receive a little bit more money or more money,
Normally they cash out. Let's get to the presentation. You'll see. Like most people who get eminent domain are very, very happy. They're very happy. I had a student who was eminent domain by a tenancy, and he was very, very happy. Like we'll see when we get further in the presentation. Yeah.
Sorry, last question. The developer in the Kello case couldn't go through with the project because no one would lend him money.
I'm not sure what the why it was. They just didn't go through with it.
In an eminent domain case, it's one of two cases where you get a 12-person jury. The one I think is murder, and the other is eminent domain.
And why do you think it is? Why do you think you get a 12-person jury?
Because life, liberty, and property.
Yeah, exactly right.
So it's very important, and a jury is going to side on the property owner that's losing their property and give them as much as they can.
Why is it viewed as important?
What?
Why isn't it all equatable?
Did you watch the first lecture?
Yeah.
Why do you think?
I don't think I understand that answer so much.
Does anybody understand? Anybody want to explain it?
what was the question?
Why is property viewed at the same level as life and liberty? But why did John Locke put it at that level? Why?
In England, you didn't
What?
have property. In England, you lived on the king's land or on the noble's land, and you could live.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, it's in England. In England, you couldn't be a property owner. It could only be the king. Just like for many years in the U.S., only men could own property. Only white men could own property for many years here in the United States. So the idea was that the people came from England to establish this new country. And to them, you couldn't really have a life or liberty, freedom, if the property wasn't yours. That's how they felt.
Do you feel that way?
Do I feel that way? Probably, because I'm very pro property rights, and I'm very against the Kello case, so probably. If you never have an opportunity to have any property, it's very difficult to live entirely freely, I think. What do you think, Rogelio?
I mean, my family, as many people's family in Miami, came from Cuba, and their family lost their property, and their lives were destroyed, and they had to come over here and start again. So
That was
I
more-
feel very strongly.
But that was probably more from an economic, meaning they lost all their value, all their money.
No, they lost.
They lost their home, their family, their everything.
That's right, they lost. I'm saying
It's economics, so how do you live without economics?
no, but here we're not talking about losing someone stealing your money. We're talking about exchanging property for value. So you're not losing your life, you're losing your ability to just
No,
live
they're
on this.
saying that
No,
nobody
the just
can take,
compensation.
nobody can take your, here we're saying your property can be taken,
Yeah.
but it can't be taken without just compensation.
Right, but I'm saying that the debate at the jury is on a public use level as
Right.
much as it's on a just compensation level. So why should, so public use is a discussion of whether or not I have the right to live here or I'm forced to live over there. Why would that all be equatable with
No, I
whether
think
the
you're
person...
getting, no, I think you're getting concepts mixed up. The question of the Supreme Court, where there's no jury, it's just those guys sitting in, and there was a woman on that Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, sitting in
Bader
the,
Ginsburg.
was that Ruth Bader?
I think so.
Well, maybe, I don't know.
RBG.
Yeah, RBG, I have her book. But, the question in this Supreme Court case was, what does those two words, public use, mean? That was the question in this Supreme Court case. But what Rogelio was saying is that if it gets to a litigation, if we go through the eminent domain statute and it gets to a litigation of the municipality or the government agency versus the property owner, then it will be decided by a jury. That's what and it's not determined on public use. It's a question of, I guess the questions will be on due process. Did the person get due process? And did they get just compensation? And did it follow the stricter statute, at least in the state of Florida, that dictates the reasons why property can be taken for eminent domain?
Now you just can't do whatever you want. Yeah. Problem.
And if developers like Desi could just do whatever they wanted, there's lots of billionaires right here in Miami. They could just kick out everybody from everywhere they want to live. So that would be the problem. Or it would be just like the places like Rogelio was saying that his family came from Cuba. I think I mentioned I went on the Florida bar trip to Cuba before Cuba was open to the U.S. and we visited family homes that were taken, and I went with a very prominent attorney who was much older than me. He was in his like 60s or late 60s, and he'd been appointed by President Obama to the UN. He'd had many positions, and we went to the house where his family, the government took it when he was 11 or 12. And we tried to knock on the door to see if he could see a staircase that he remembered, and they wouldn't let us in. And they took not only, the home, but they took the factories, they took everything. And they're doing the same thing in Venezuela, they do it in Argentina, they do it, now in 2016, they do it in many places all over the world. So a lot of people really didn't like this Kello case that expanded the idea of what is public use to be so broad that it could be economic development.
And
Yeah.
they also are trying to do that in Miami. There's many mafia here in Miami. And for him, if you ask that question to your grandma, the property is compared with her life. Maybe to you it's different, but yep.
And I remain in the Mexican in a historical area, like, Wynwood, they have like a Buena Vista, like 3 or 4 blocks that they can destroy because it's like old houses, like community or something like that. So the
A
government.
historic district.
You can do
So
that.
every domain can do that, like developers or government can.
That's not considered eminent domain. You still own the property, and you can live there and.
Well, let's see, the government need that area for something that is historical.
If the government, in the state of Florida, if the government needs the property and they want to take it, they have to go through the eminent domain statute. And that's the one I just pulled up. So if you guys want to read that, you can see it. But the premise of going through these 2 Supreme Court cases, they're some of the most well-known Supreme Court cases in zoning. The first one, Euclid, in the 1920s, established zoning as something, a police power that the state or municipality can use. And the Kello case brought in the definition of public use to mean economic development, which made a lot of people who strongly believe in property rights very uncomfortable, because I think, like Gail said, I think it's a slippery slope. How do you know how broad economic development is going to get? Any other questions? on this? Yep.
I mean, the elasticity of the Constitution open two different scenarios.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
That's why maybe Rubio was right, because you have to, in one way or another, to control, because the elasticity could be just a weapon for one part instead of the other.
Yeah. More questions? Okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna take like a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about Miami 21, and we're gonna do dinner a little later. So we read these Supreme Court cases like from the 1920s and like 100 years later. Yes, for you. So who cares, kind of, right? That's 100 years ago, but we care because now we have zoning. And then we read this case from the 2005, which is about 10 years ago. And who cares about that? But we care because a presidential candidate who's actually from Florida enacted the law that, and we can show you the provision of it, that actually negates the Kello expansion of public use in the state of Florida. And tonight we're going to talk now, we're going to get right back into where we are, 2016, and we're going to talk with Rogelio about like what's happening in the city and how zoning impacts the city. First, we're going to look at what Marco Rubio did. You want to read it? No, sorry. Yes.
Notwithstanding any other provision of law, including any charter provision, ordinance, statute, or special law, the state, any political subdivision, as defined in statute 1.08.018, which is that's a local government, county or city, or any other entity to which the power of eminent domain is delegated, may not exercise the power of eminent domain to take private property for the purpose of abating or eliminating a public nuisance, notwithstanding any other provision of law, including any charter provision, ordinance, statute, or special law, abating or eliminate a public nuisance is not a valid public purpose or use for which private property may be taken by eminent domain and does not satisfy the public purpose requirement of Section 6A, Article 10 of the state constitution. This subsection does not diminish the power of counties or municipalities to adopt or enforce county or municipal ordinances related to code enforcement or the elimination of public nuisances to the extent that such ordinance do not authorize the taking of private property or eminent domain. Notwithstanding other provision of ordinance, statute, or let me skip this part, of eminent domain is delegated, may not exercise the power of eminent domain to take private property for the purpose of eliminating slum or blight conditions. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, including charter provision, ordinance, or special law, taking private property for the purpose of preventing or eliminating slum or blight conditions is not a valid public purpose or use for which property may be taken by eminent domain and does not satisfy the public purpose requirement.
So, and it was, if you see right here, it was passed in 2006, which was a year after the Kello case. So, is the Kello case still good law? But
I mean, technically, well, since it didn't build anything on it, I guess, yeah, it's not that this would be against the Keller case, but maybe if something were built on it, then it'd be okay.
The Kello case still stands as the precedent in the country.
Oh.
In the whole country, the Kello case stands as the precedent. The precedent is that economic development does satisfy the public use. But then, they want to wiggle out of it, sort of, right? It's not part of the precedents, but they say, states, if you guys don't like it, people, if you don't like it, go to the legislature, vote people in, and they can make a more restrictive law. So Marco Rubio, who's a Republican, right, and for property rights, made a more restrictive law. It doesn't mean that it's still the precedent in the United States that economic development means public purpose. But the court, in its decision, said that states could make it more narrow. And that's what we see happen in our state, right? Mm-hmm. So now we're going to talk about the poor people, right, who get eminent domains. These poor people whose property gets taken.
Okay, so I found this case. This is Interstate 395, MacArthur Causeway, the highway that comes from Miami Beach, just north of here. The state is widening the project to create this signature bridge. I'm not a big fan of the project, but anyways, they're doing it. And so there's this case that the court approved a $2 million payment to artist George Santos Calderon for a building on a small 4,200 square foot lot in Overtown. He will also get $422,000 in court attorney fees related to the fight, so that's what his attorneys are going to get from this. Fees for the, and he paid $105,000 for the property in 2001. So he did all right.
So he got, and what about the Miami Circle that we're going to talk about when we're on the river?
The Miami Circle is another case where there was a developer that wanted to build a project right just north of here. The city had approved the project, but the city has a requirement for an archaeologist on site, and they found some artifacts. And so then the state came in and took the property and bought the property, and they paid him, I forgot how many millions of dollars.
Paid him $24 million.
$24 million.
And we're going to drive by it. He did do the entitlements. If he went through the process, I think he was going to build either apartment building or condos, and it was going to be like 300 of them. But he didn't start construction or anything. So the state, and I have a reading for you guys about it. It's for everyone, even if this is the extra credit. If you're not going to be on the boat tour, but you still want extra credit, it's the Miami Circle reading. It's from the city commission, and it's trying to view the eminent domain. But so it was a very unique piece of property, because you're going to see on the Miami River, it's like the only piece of property that is riverfront and not built on or planned to be built on, and it's right near where the Icon Brickell is. And it's another case of eminent domain, and the guy did very well. But supposedly he didn't want to do very well with eminent domain. He wanted to build a tower. So, and for that purpose of that was for historic preservation.
Historic preservation, and they turned it into a park, so it truly is public use. And this will be a road, so it will be truly a public use.
Yeah.
Why have they haven't broken any ground on that property across from it next to the Epic?
We're going to talk about it on the Miami River Tour.
Alright.
It's actually a very exciting project.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Ferrari project?
Yeah, no, it's the Aston Martin James Bond project. It's very exciting. Yeah. And that acre of property was like a little over an acre. It was bought for vacant for $125 million. So we're gonna see some cool stuff on the river. Yeah.
The parking lot spot on 12th Street, I think just got approved for 2 towers and a connecting bridge.
Yeah, that's the same people that own this building and the building next door. Yes.
That's Tibor
But
Hall,
so
isn't it?
let's get to our presentation.
All right, so I'm going to talk about planning and zoning regulations in South Florida. So just briefly, we live in the state of Florida. This is the state of Florida, where we have 67 counties. We're in Miami-Dade County, and in Miami-Dade County you have 36 local governments. Actually, it's 35 now because we no longer have Islandia, so I need to update this map. And so each of these has 3 documents that guide what you can and can't do with your property. And these are going to be your comprehensive plan, your code of ordinances, and your zoning code, which is some cities refer to it as their land development regulations as well. So the first thing, the most important thing per state law in Florida, and most states also have similar regulations, is your comprehensive plan. Florida Statute 163 says that each city and county has to have a comprehensive plan, and it tells you how the city is going to meet the needs of residents, visitors, and businesses, how we're going to preserve the quality of communities, requires that as population grows, as density increases, that public services increase to support that density.
What does density mean?
Oh, density is how many units you have on an acre, how many residential units fit on an acre of property.
So how dense do you think this part of town is? Very great. Are we at the 1,000 units per acre? Is that here?
Brickell allows 500 units per acre. The Central Business District allows 1,000.
You look up, and when you drive home or when you're on the boat tour, look around, and you'll understand what density means.
Yeah. But actually, the densest part of the city, in actuality, is Little Havana. Actually has more units per acre built than, even though Brickell allows for more, it has more units per acre built because the units are very tiny and very dense, very tightly packed together. And this is called concurrency. So as you build new property, you need to ensure that there's sufficient services available to serve that development.
And there's my undergrads probably know, what is the point of the concurrency provision of the Florida Constitution?
I mean, I know that concurrency aligns with like the highest and best use, and also in like infrastructure and things like that having to be met in order for you to
It
build.
aligns that infrastructure like roads and sewer has to be there before you can build. So you can't just build out there and like, you know, pass the urban boundary line or something like that and not have the infrastructure. And it's on the real estate exam sometimes, not my real estate exam, it could be on my real estate exam, but the state of Florida asks about that. But I like to call it the toilet provision. Because if you think about a new building going up, you know, that has like 800 units in it, how many toilets are going to be flushed? Maybe 1,600 or more, right? So you want to make sure before that building goes up that there's enough infrastructure there to handle the load, right? That's coming out. So I like to think of it as a toilet provision. It's just a way to remember that it's an infrastructure provision.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also, it applies to parks, that you have enough ability to take away trash. A lot of trash in 800 units. Roads, public transportation. Some cities instituted for police and fire. And what else am I missing? I think that's about it. So, and then it addresses other issues. So, uses of land, what you can and can't do with your property generally. Management and preservation of natural resources. So, in the county, you'll have mines out in West Dade, so you want to preserve that resource, make sure it will last, or farmland is a resource that you want to preserve. Preserve historically significant areas, and have enough room to grow, because if you're not growing, you're shrinking, and you want to make sure that there's enough room to grow, and enough infrastructure. So the plan creates the framework for how you're going to do all of your other projects and all of your other development within the city. And it has a future land use map that basically gives you the general density allowed on a property, the intensity, which the intensity means how many square feet you can build on your property, and the general uses that you can build. So this is the City of Miami Beach's comprehensive plan, and within this plan there is this future land use map, and you see different colors on the map. So this tells you what the different land use districts are. So these yellows are single family. These oranges are high density areas that allow for hotels or apartments. The reds typically allow for commercial uses and higher densities. And then the blues are government properties, so parks or golf courses, schools, etc. So, yeah.
Can you explain intensity again?
Intensity is how many square feet you can build on your property. So you will have typically a number called a floor area ratio or a floor lot ratio attached to each zoning district. Mm-hmm. And let's say there's a number, and that has a number. So let's say your floor area ratio is 2, and you own 10,000 square feet. So you multiply 10,000 square feet times 2, you can build a 20,000 square foot building.
Okay.
So that's a regulation you'll need to know and look for when you're trying to buy and sell a property. You'll want to know what the floor area ratio or floor lot ratio is.
What's the difference then between that and density? The main difference?
They're just two different tools that you
Well,
have.
I think the difference is density is the number of units allowed per acre, and the intensity is the square footage that the structure can take on the parcel of land.
Okay.
So if you have a high intensity but a low density, the point is to have large units in that area. If you have a low intensity and a low density, it's small units, typically a single family or townhomes.
Okay, I got you.
So it's just two tools that we have to regulate what you can and can't do with your property.
Okay, cool.
And also knowing the density and intensity, if you're looking for a site to buy yourself, or if you're working with somebody that, you know, like Lou says that she works with people looking to buy land, you know, if they want a place that's really dense, hopefully they have a lot of money, because they're going to do a pro forma and figure out how much they can build and how much they can sell for. And normally those parcels that are very dense, can build a lot of units, are more expensive than those that don't allow as many units.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's our land use map. This is the City of Miami's. Obviously much bigger, and you can see these very dark reds here. This is where the very high density areas are allowed to be. So this area, like I said, you have 1,000 units per acre. Brickell with this blue outline means you have 500 units per acre. Same in Omni. Park West area is 300 units per acre, I believe. And then you have Little Havana has very high density allowed too, and then these are single family and duplex neighborhoods in yellow. Blues are government, so your hospital, the seaport, trash facilities. You have these dark blues are natural areas that you want to preserve in their natural state. The lighter greens are parks. So basically this is generally telling you what you can and can't do with your property.
Do you have to be a planner to find these maps?
No, it's all available on websites. Typically, the planning department of the city that you're looking for will have this on their website. You'll see the comprehensive plan, and within that, you'll see the future land use element and the future land use map. And in Florida, we have a public records law that's the Sunshine Law, that anything that we do is public record, and any document that we have is a public record, and you have the right to see it and copy it as a member of the public. So this is Miami-Dade County's future land use map. You see here these dark lines, this is the urban development boundary. So outside of that, you basically can only have farmland or very low density homes. 1 unit per 5 acres typically is what you're allowed. Then the yellows are the single family areas. You'll have these little red areas at specific nodes, which is where they want to intensify. They're typically at metro rail stations where they want to have very high density, so people use the metro rail or the busway in South Dade. And then you see they generally try to, where you have a city, they just generally try to match whatever the city has as what they designate. So the next document you have is your Code of Ordinances. This is where all of the city's laws are typically placed. Basically all regulations from how you build your roadways to how your departments operate, what fees you have set. It says that you will have a comprehensive plan, that you will have a zoning ordinance, your historic preservation laws, rules for alcohol sales, and all sorts of things. So you will have a lot of regulations related to what you can do with your property within your Code of Ordinances. So within Miami, their historic preservation program is within the Code of Ordinances, Chapter 17. And so this tells you where your historic districts are. So you see those areas in red in the north, those are historic districts, Maimo area, Buena Vista, which is the area that you're referring to just by Wynwood. A few down in the Coconut Grove area. And then another thing you have is the archaeological zone, which follows the Miami River and the bay south into Brickell. And we joke that it's called the Tecuesta zone because it's going to cost you, because if you do anything that requires you to dig, you have to have an archaeologist. Tecuesta means it's going to cost you in Spanish. And the Tecuesta Indians were the native tribe that was originally in this area. So you have to have an archaeologist watching all of the movement of the property to make sure that if there are artifacts, that they are preserved, and if it's significant enough to let the state know in case they want to purchase the site, as they did here at the mouth of the Miami River, where you have the Miami Circle, where they found that that was a significant resource and that needed to be preserved.
That happened with the Adeco area?
In Miami Beach, yeah, I'll get to Miami Beach in a second. So this is
It's
just
really important to remember that each municipality has its own zoning code. So one time I represented an owner, had my broker hat on in that deal, and he owned 2 shopping centers. They were on 2 sides of the street, actually 2 sides of Southwest 8th Street. And I couldn't find one on the City of Miami zoning map. And it was because it was not in the City of Miami, it was in the City of West Miami. So, you know, it could be on the opposite side of the street, it could be in different cities, so they have different zoning codes. Right.
So they have, similar to what you have in the Arco District, they do have historic districts. There's one in the Miami River that you'll see, that you'll go by tomorrow, called Spring Garden. It's actually a really cool little neighborhood. And you have the Maimo District, Palm View, and several other residential areas that are historic districts. And historic districts is not that you have to keep everything. It's that whatever you do has to go before a historic preservation board, and they make a decision as to what you have to preserve and what you can demolish or what you can change. So it's not that it's all locked in place, but it's going to be tougher to do certain things to preserve the character or the historic quality. I'll get to Miami Beach in a second, though. But you have Another important concept is alcohol regulations. So you don't want bars and people partying everywhere in the city because people need to sleep and they don't want people making noise. This is a constant dilemma that we have in Miami Beach. So you have, in Miami, you have entertainment districts, which allows you to have a certain number of bars within a close proximity to each other, and so that's where you want people to go out. So you have here, for example, the Brickell Village. Central Brickell is an entertainment district. You have one in Wynwood, Media Entertainment District, which is around 15th Street. There's actually one in Overtown along 2nd Avenue. There's one in Little Haiti, also called Lemon City, and there's one in the south part of Liberty City. So those are areas where there can be a concentration of bars. And the city's trying to encourage some development in those areas of entertainment uses. Also, there's one in the Design District and Midtown and Coconut Grove, I believe. Yeah, Coconut Grove. So these are areas where where they want to encourage that use. Yes.
How are those designated, or how do they come to be those here in Miami?
You have due process, and so the most recent one that was done was in Wynwood. A lot of property owners got together and said, look, we want to change the way this area is operating because it's not functioning. Wynwood 6-7 years ago was a dead zone. There was nothing, it was abandoned warehouses, some industrial businesses, but there wasn't much going on there. They said, we want something to change. So they went to the city and got support from the commissioners, and then we had to send notices out to the property owners. Look, we're going to propose this law and change this law, and we moved forward. They had to go through a hearing of this, 2 hearings of the city commission where they read it, the ordinance, take public comment, public input, to see if everybody's okay with it. And if everybody's okay, or even if they're not okay, they can still vote for it too. The commission approved it, and they have to vote on it twice, on 2 separate days.
Anybody can go to a public hearing, anybody can speak. So.
Is that the Cafe District?
Wynwood Cafe District, yeah. And so the way that works is within that area, within the limits of that boundary, which is this red area up there, you can have, originally it was 25 liquor licenses. It was a smaller area, and you could have 25 liquor licenses anywhere within that district. And then a few years after that, it was so successful that they expanded it and made it either 50 or 60 liquor licenses within that area. So that's the way that one works. And so outside of the entertainment districts, typically a bar has to be 1,500 feet from the next closest bar. So you don't have that concentration of the entertainment uses and the alcohol uses. And that's another type of zoning regulation. You can require that certain types of businesses be apart from each other, so that you don't have a nuisance use that's going to affect residential areas that are nearby, or there's some other type of community that's nearby that you want to preserve. And then in Miami Beach, we have the mixed-use entertainment district. So this is where we want our bars to be: Ocean Drive, Collins, Washington Avenue. And then just west of that, you have residential areas where obviously you can't have bars. So that's the type of regulation that we have in our zoning and city codes. Yes?
Going back to the Tequesta part on the rivers, I remember a couple months ago I was reading something about increasing dockage on the river and there being potential like waterway transportation that they were going to start implementing. But
water taxis?
Yeah, that was going to be I think it's called the 88. That they're talking to something like some abbreviation such as that.
ADA is American with Disabilities Act.
Oh, definitely not. No way. Well, I wanted to know if like zoning.
ADA has a lot to do with real estate, but not in zoning. They just have to.
Yeah, well, I wanted to know if like zoning were like they were gonna like potentially pass that and allow for water taxis.
Are you coming on both sides?
Yeah.
Asking on both sides. We're gonna keep moving.
Yeah, well, there are regulations which require you to have a 50-foot wide setback so that you do provide for public access. And that's another zoning regulation you'll see in Miami 21. And also in the county rules, you have to do it. Yeah.
I recently spoke with someone in North Miami, and I know that they changed the height requirements from 55 feet to 110. However, it was already voted
North
by.
Miami, what zoning code would it be?
It was, well, the one I called on was C1, which was commercial.
What zoning code would it be in North Miami? The city of North Miami.
Right.
Right.
So I spoke with the city of North Miami, the commissioners had already approved it, it was already moving forward, but then they told me they had to take it up to the state level, and then it had to.
So, they had to do probably a comprehensive plan amendment, which is the first document that I told you about.
Right.
And everything that you do has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So if your comprehensive plan has a lower number, they need to raise that. And when you change your comprehensive plan, it does need to be approved by the state, and several state agencies approve it. So that's why the comprehensive plan is a more general document, but it has a lot more oversight from the state, and it has to meet certain state laws and state regulations. So when you amend that, yeah, you have to get it approved by the state. If it's just your zoning ordinance, which has more detailed regulations as to what you can do with your property, setbacks, which means how far in from the lot line you can develop, parking requirements, how much parking you have to provide for the use that you're doing, architecture styles, that the city doesn't need to go to the state, the city can adopt that on its own. But even changes to that require notice, requires you to go to a planning board, and requires you to go to two hearings of a city commission. Yes?
Okay, so in Miami Beach, there was recently a case where there was a restaurant that was grandfathered in against the zoning laws, and it just switched hands. Usually in those cases, would the grandfather stay there? And would the
Yeah, we don't, there are some cities that do, that have a regulation that if you sell it, you lose your grandfathering in, but we're not one of those. You keep your
But that's
grandfather.
something that you should check, because if you're in a different municipality and somebody wants to buy a business that's grandfathered in, you should check to make sure that the sale would trigger any change.
So if you buy a property that's grandfathered in, you get that designation as well as soon as you purchase it off that guy? It's like a
City of Miami Beach, yes.
Miami Beach.
But there are some cities where if you sell it, you lose your grandfather.
But I want to keep moving because we have a lot of presentations.
So this is Miami Beach's historic districts. 60% of Miami Beach is in a historic district, so you have the Art Deco areas to the east, Flamingo Park, which is a residential neighborhood. Several of the old resorts along Collins Avenue are in a historic district. And
How do you guys think that they didn't build, like buildings that look like Brickell on Ocean Drive or Sunny Isles?
Keep the Art Deco.
Do you think that adds value? Like somebody that owns property on Ocean Drive, they might want to build something like, the Trump Grands and Sunny Isles with that many units. Does it add value to have a historic district?
Definitely,
Yes, for sure.
What do you think, Celia?
No, I agree. Yeah, it definitely adds value to have the historic district and create a unique character that you're not going to find anywhere else.
So basically what it did for the city of Miami Beach is it made the identity is why people say they're coming, LeBron James said he was bringing his talents to Miami Beach, even though he was coming to Miami, right? Because people have the image of Ocean Drive in their minds, of Miami Vice from a lot of different TV shows. So even though it was a restriction, right? It's a zoning restriction, just like they put on Ms. Ambler over there. It's a restriction on how the people can use their property. That type of restriction actually ended up creating a brand or identity for the city that made the property values increase all around it.
Yeah.
So zoning can be used for a lot of different purposes.
But also remember the parking in at 7 in Miami Beach, they keep outside the shell, I believe, and then they make their parking lot on 7th. So
7th Street.
Yeah, the ground floor,
We'll talk
Valley
about
Garage.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
talk about that.
Here, for example, this is a theater on Lincoln. This was an old theater on Lincoln Road that they've turned into an H&M store, and it's come out great. And you see the historic building on the side. You walk in, and it's a store, a shopping store, but you see the old screen, so you have the look of the old theater, but it's a new use. It's a modern use. And we're currently looking at creating a historic district in the North Beach part of the city, and it requires due process because it's going to make it tougher to develop. It's not tougher, but you're going to have to go through another hoop to develop there. And so the process to get that designated is probably going to be about a year of due process, of meetings and meetings and meetings and notices to the property owners so that you have an opportunity to speak and be heard as to whether you support it or don't support it and if you think it'll hurt you or help you.
And property owners who own property where there's a zoning change, especially where they're going to make a historic district, what do you think they're doing? What?
They want to fight, they want to keep the property.
Who are they calling? What?
Their attorney.
Besides their attorney.
Well,
They're calling their commissioners, because the commissioners are gonna vote on it, right? So they're calling their commissioners and they're trying to say, vote this way, don't vote that way. Right.
so.
North Beach, do you
Yeah.
mean like
Is there-
74th?
I don't wanna ask,
Mhm.
I wanna keep us
A
going.
little bit north, yeah, 75th and Collins,
So
yeah,
I
that
just
whole area.
wanted to ask if in Miami Beach, are there any TDRs as part of the historic process or?
Miami Beach has a strict provision that doesn't allow us to have TDRs without going to the voters.
What's a TDR?
Okay, so TDR is transfer of development rights. That's something you will see. It's common in the city of Miami, and I believe the county does it for some of the areas outside of the urban development boundary. So basically what it allows you to do is if you have an area that you want to preserve the low scale of it, but the property when you bought it had the ability to develop something high, but we've now put in a historic regulation, historic preservation regulation that requires you to keep it low, you have a difference of property rights that you can't use essentially, that you've paid for and you can't use. So what transfer of development rights allows you to do is sell it to another property where they can use it. So in the city of Miami, the MIMO district, which is Biscayne Boulevard to the north, has a height limit of 35 feet. But originally those properties could build much higher. So they can take that square footage and sell it to a property either downtown or Coconut Grove or Brickell, so that they can build a taller building. So you can sell those property rights. But in Miami Beach, we can't. We have a strict charter provision that doesn't let you do that without going to the voters. But the city of Miami, you can. In the city of Miami, you can. And I think the county allows it in areas outside the urban development boundary where land was zoned for homes that they now have for agriculture, or now only allow you to have agriculture, so they're allowed to sell their development rights to somebody that can use them. So your zoning ordinance, this is a big document that you're going to want to look at if you're buying and selling a property. This is very detailed as to what you can do. So it provides regulations for what type of buildings you can build on your land, and it has several tools in order to do this, to tell you what you can and can't do with your property. Setbacks, density, intensity, which we've described, lot coverage. Lot coverage tells you how much of your property you can cover and how much of it has to be open space. So in a single family area where we want you to have yards everywhere and have green space, you'll have a lot coverage standard.
And some people are surprised by that. They say, well, I bought my property, I don't have a mortgage on it. Why can't I do whatever I want? The government's coming in and telling me I can't use every single inch of it. But that's because the zoning regulations, they want to preserve certain neighborhoods
Give it a certain look.
have a look and feel.
Yeah. You'll have a height limit or green space requirement. You'll have design guidelines, so if there's a certain type of architecture that we want to have in an area that's unique, you can have design guidelines for that, and then signage regulation. You don't want signs everywhere, that are ugly, so you'll have regulations that make the signs, look a little nicer and maybe not so much in your face.
I have something. Do you guys think that I have something? I've showed it to you. Do you think that you can put any sign you want in your yard? If you own a property, could you put any sign you want in your yard? What?
Depends on HOA.
But it's your property. I mean, why don't you think you could put any sign that you want?
Can't put like a Trump sign?
What?
Some areas have
Yeah, Corrigan was very.
I showed you this one before. This is a good one. Somebody actually contacted the zoning department. Oh wait, this is my lecture. It says it's in my neighborhood. That's why.
Wonderful city.
I hope I have it. Maybe I don't have it.
Or even strict.
I do. So this is something in my neighborhood. You guys, I've told you about my neighborhood. It's a really interesting place. So somebody wrote to the zoning and planning director in Miami Beach. I hope you're well. I wanted to get your thoughts on the attached image. My neighbor across the canal recently installed this sign on his property. It's 10 feet by 18 feet, approximate dimensions. This is in addition to another red neon sign of a strip club that he keeps glowing 24/7 on his rear terrace, that I have the pleasure of experiencing all night from my bedroom. While I understand different tastes in collecting and what can constitute art, I would imagine that there's something in the code, and I mean the zoning code, that can help restrain and remove the seedy old Times Square feel my neighbor is trying to achieve. As a father, you could imagine my emotions and having to explain to my 7-year-old son what an adult pleasure emporium is when asked. On a similar matter, I laughed so much that I got this email. What is the code with regards to underwater lights in canals? As unfortunately this neighbor is also employing those wonderful new advancements in LED technology, igniting the canal to a vibrant glow. And this is a sign.
No way.
So zoning can even regulate that, even though the guy owns his own property. If it said happy birthday, the neighbor probably wouldn't. And I don't want to get into a free speech discussion, but just to say that this neighbor was looking for redress from the zoning code about the sign. Where is this?
I think they came up with an agreement because his wife was starting to get disappointed with him and they're going to take him down. But,
Oh.
there are issues, other Supreme Court cases that you have the right to free speech, freedom of the press. So there's issues with the ability to regulate the content on a sign. And we're getting more, as local governments, getting more restrictions on what we can regulate and can't regulate. So it's a constant give and take on what you can do and can't do. So I don't know that we've come to a
Decision. But it's another place
But,
where
yeah.
people look for redress for the code.
So, yeah, Miami Beach is interesting on
Sorry, Seb.
That's okay. So then they provide you detailed regulations for what you can and can't do on your land. So you'll have districts, zoning districts, and they'll have residential, and then it'll be divided between large scale, which will be apartments or condos, townhouses, duplexes, and single family. You'll have commercial districts, again, ranging from large scale to neighborhood and office buildings, allowing for hotels, some places flea markets or not flea markets, restaurants, and you'll have to regulate adult entertainment where you can't have that and you can't have that. Industrial, again, you can break that down further into polluting industrial or just a warehouse or marine industrial. You can regulate it in all sorts of ways. Again, government, you want to regulate government uses differently because you may be okay with a park and a community center, but you don't necessarily want a prison next to your house. So you want to regulate different things in different ways. You're going to designate parks and then also conservation, and then a big one now is mixed use, where you want to have everything in the building so that residents don't need to drive so much. You can be within Brickell City Center, for example, you have hotels, condos, offices, retail. You never have to leave, you never have to drive. So this is a big zoning tool that's being pushed now to improve traffic flow.
Real quick, there's a cement plant in Wynwood. Is that ever going to change, or
they're allowed to be there. Their zoning is industrial. Wynwood allows for industrial uses because it was historically an industrial area, and I think the people going in there like the edginess and the mix of the industrial with the commercial. It gives it a very unique feel. So as long as they're making money and nobody offers them a lot of money to build a condo, I think it'll be there.
It's heavy polluting, yeah?
It's definitely going to be heavy polluted, and anything you do there afterwards will require a lot of cleanup and removing the soil and doing all sorts of stuff before you can have a condo or a commercial building. So in your zoning ordinance, you have sound urban planning principles, where you have conservation of neighborhoods, resources, natural environment, improve how high-density areas transition into low-density areas. You want to allow access to the environment, to the riverfront, so you want to have public access to the river. You put that in your zoning code. You want to have regulations for conserving energy. We're now green buildings. Miami requires anything over 50,000 square feet to be LEED, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's a green building standard, LEED Silver. And in Miami Beach, we just passed a law that anything over 7,000 square feet needs to be LEED Gold. So they're going to have to be green buildings when you build moving forward in Miami Beach. So to consume less energy, less pollution, hopefully generate less traffic, and be better for the environment. How you grow. Within the county, you don't want to just spread out all into the farmland and consume all of our farmland, or develop really far away and make people drive into the city, so we have the urban development around it. So you want to grow in a rational manner. So these are all things that we take into account in our zoning ordinances. And protection of the natural environment. So we want to protect the Everglades. We want to protect mangroves along the bay, because mangroves protect you when there's a storm surge. Mangroves filter the water in the bay. They have all sorts of positive, so we want to protect these things. Protecting trees. In Miami and Miami Beach, you can't just go in and tear down a tree whenever you want. Your zoning ordinance has specific regulations that require you to get a permit, and if you tear down a tree, you need to replace the tree. Because we've determined it's good for the environment, it keeps temperatures cooler, it encourages people to walk if there's shade. So we want to have sound urban planning principles. Other urban planning principles. If you have a waterfront view or a view, you don't want to give that to cars. So you have this old building on Biscayne Boulevard, and you have this probably 10-story parking garage, and all these cars have a beautiful view of Biscayne Bay when they're standing there parking. They've wasted that resource. So in Miami now, with Miami 21, we started implementing it sooner. Your parking has to be in the back, and you have to have habitable space. So these are residential units. This is 50 Biscayne. And those residential units get to enjoy that view, and the parking garage is behind them.
And let's talk about, so Miami 21, what kind of, is it a Euclidean code, or you're going to get there?
I'm going to get there in a second. So here's what a Euclidean code is.
There he is,
There's
in the village of Euclid.
in the village of Euclid. It's near Cleveland, so I was wearing my Heat shirt because of LeBron. Just upset about that. And I hope they don't win today in the World Series. So a Euclidean code, they're tough to read, and it has complex criteria for what uses are allowed and not allowed, and what uses are conditional. A conditional use means a use that you have to go before a board and get approval for, or get some sort of appealable approval for, in order to do that use.
Why would you maybe, if you were developers, as you're our developer today, why would you maybe not want to go before a board? Like the planning board or the city commission?
Because it might not go your way.
You don't know what they're going to do, and it's open to the public. So a whole bunch of people from the public might come in and protest.
And if a use is conditional, it's typically a use that may have a negative impact on the community, but if done properly, that negative impact can be mitigated. So let's say conditional use might be a public storage yard would be a conditional use. So you have to, they're typically ugly buildings, and they look terrible in a community if you have a public storage facility. So in the conditional use process, you'll say, fine, you can do it, but you have to make it pretty. You have to put trees on the outside or paint the building in a certain way, have windows. So you can do it, but you have to do it properly. So in a conditional use process, there's some give and take and there's negotiation. So they don't regulate design typically, they regulate setbacks, so how far back your building has to be, the density, and then the floor area ratio, which is the intensity. They don't address how the building has to be placed on a site, so within the setbacks you can put the building wherever you want. They don't address how the building affects other properties that are next to them very well, and how the pedestrian environment is regulated, which I'll describe what that means later. So when you have a Euclidean code, you have to negotiate. You go into your planning department and don't negotiate. Can I do this? Yes, but if you do that, no, but your building is not going to be, you have a very tough negotiation process.
Ambiguous, and it's less clear what you can do, and it takes a lot of attorney's fees and a lot of more time than in a form-based, which will.
And sometimes we'll have some guidelines, and we'll tell you what we want to see. So we want to see an area with a lot of glass and walking. So if you're in downtown, you want to see retail and be able to shop and walk. So we'll have here a standard: all portions of a project fronting a street or sidewalk shall incorporate an architecturally appropriate amount of transparency. So you have to have windows, but you have the term architecturally appropriate. We're not giving you a standard. We really don't know what that means, so you have to negotiate with us what that really means.
Kind of like the question I asked you guys about when we were talking about the grant from God. We looked at the grant of the world from God to man as the biggest land grant, right? But I asked them if they'd rather have that ambiguous grant or something very specific, right? That's like a deed that tells you exactly what you're getting. This is kind of the same idea. Like this is the Euclidean Code was very ambiguous.
Yeah.
So you didn't know exactly what you could do. So you had to spend a lot of time with the city, negotiating, like pushing, thinking about it. And we're going to contrast that with the form-based code, which is much more specific.
Yeah, and you have standards like where feasible, which is sensitive and compatible. It's not very specific. And sometimes you don't have even this type of guidelines, and it leads to development that's it's ugly, for lack of a better term, or repetitive. So, Kendall Drive, no offense to anybody who lives off of Kendall Drive, my grandparents lived near there, but the buildings look the same over and over, the same building over and over and over and over again. Typically a parking lot with a little bit of retail in the back, over and over and over and over again. So it doesn't lead to a good style of development. It's just tough to get good development. So this is what Miami Beach has. And we have 4 land use boards: Board of Adjustment for variances, Historic Preservation Board, Design Review Board, and Planning Board. Depending on where you're located and what type of project you're building, you'll need to go to 1 or 2 of those boards, never more than 2. And you'll have a design review process, and we'll be fighting with you to make the building look prettier, to make the building address the community better, to make the building an exceptional building. Some cities, they don't care so much, and they'll let you just move forward with anything. So it depends on the local government what you can and can't do. So then in a Euclidean Code, you're going to have this process that's tough. It's labor intensive. And in Miami Beach, the residents appreciate that because they like to show up to the meetings, and they want to know exactly what's going to be built and how it's going to be built and oriented and designed.
Yeah.
Is there, in Miami Beach, is there like a neighborhood board or a neighborhood association that also has some input in this process?
My neighborhood went to the design review board, and we contested. They built a condominium block across the canal from us, and I think it was supposed to be 100 units. It was supposed to look like a big rectangle. So it's just going to look like a big block of windows. So we protested them, and we said that it didn't fit within the character of the neighborhood. And we got the design changed, so it's more a terrace look. It's not one big block. And we also got the number of units reduced. I don't know how many units it is now, 45 or 60. It's not the 100 that they were going for. So we went and walked, and we went to the city commission and we protested. Well, and also the design review board.
But when you say is the residents, or is there any form of organization?
There's a lot of organizations in Miami Beach, but they're not governmental organizations. All these boards are public boards, and the public can go and voice their opinion. And in Miami Beach, you know, if you want to watch some good TV, you can watch some of these city commission meetings and planning board meetings because the people are very vocal and very, what would we call them?
Active
Active
in the community.
and theatrical. Like you could say it's like a telenovela a little bit on
No
it.
opinion on that.
They're interesting. Yeah.
In some of the more active neighborhoods, the board will recommend, hey, if you're a developer presenting a project, they will ask, did you go to that neighborhood association and present your project? And
Developer did go to our neighborhood.
So, and if you say no, they'll say, well, we're not gonna vote on your item until you do go before that association. So it's for some of the more active ones. For some of the less active ones, that's not the case, but it's in the hands of the board and what they want to do.
And you know,
but it's not a formal structure.
all of this is, you know, part of tonight's discussion, part of last week's discussion. We're still in the early voting period for president. All this is about being active, being politically active, being active in your community, voting, letting your commissioners know who you are. Because it's very involved in what you can and can't do with your property and what your neighbor can and can't do with their property.
So, yeah, so the code is vague in a lot of things with Miami Beach. So we have this, like I said, we have this big design process that you have to go through to get development. Yes?
Zoning also have to do with, because you said you are in an environmental part. What about solar panels? Also, zoning has to do with that.
Well, there's this, you do regulate where building can and can't be located, so that the panels have to be located in an area where you can build. It's as simple as that, because there was a state law passed in 2009 that says local governments can't prohibit the installation of solar panels in the state of Florida. But, you know, it's different. But zoning, yeah, it regulates where it can and can't go.
Yeah, because I already voted yesterday, 2 days ago, and they have one amendment about solar panels, and if it's going to be approved, it's going to start in January.
Yeah, but in June there was an amendment that said you can allow for solar panels, but in state law it already says you can have them.
Quick question. Are you guys taking into account rising sea level waters when it comes to zoning in Miami Beach especially?
Absolutely. We have regulations. We've changed regulations related to where you consider your ground floor. So originally we would start measuring height at whatever level the sidewalk was. In a lot of parts of the city of Miami Beach, that level is flooding, so we don't want buildings to start at the level of the sidewalk. So we're saying we have a measurement called the FEMA base flood elevation, and that's where we want to start measuring from, and we actually now have an additional 5 feet, up to an additional 5 feet that you can go above that level. And from that point forward, whatever our height restriction is, we will count from that point. So as new construction comes in, it'll be built much higher than the older construction, so that new building will be able to withstand flooding and rising seas. We are still trying to figure out what to do with the historic buildings. Some of them can be raised, some of them can't. Some of them maybe we can put panels, or some of them we can put pumps or do other things. So we're still looking into that, but definitely that's a zoning requirement. We also have
In your planning and zoning department.
about 20, 25.
The city of Miami have about 60.
Yeah, we're understaffed because we have very complex regulations and very few people able to review everything with a lot happening. And then we have regulations for sea walls and all sorts of stuff that we're doing for sea level rise in our zoning ordinance. Definitely we take that into account. So City of Miami, Miami 21, your city, your plan, is a form-based code. And it's much simpler to read. It has a lot of graphics that allow you to simplify what you want to do, what you can't do. It still regulates uses, but not as much. So the use regulations are much simpler, and I'll show you an example of that. And it focuses on where we want to see the building located on the site, the scale of the building, how the building will react if it's next to a lower building, what the front of the building has to look like. But generally your use regulations are not as restricted. We care more about how the building looks than what you do with your building. And it provides very precise criteria. So what Miami Beach has to negotiate, Miami gets automatically. You don't have to negotiate it. You basically have to do it this way. You see what the regulations are, so you will do it this way, and your project can get approved in a much simpler and quicker fashion. And also it has public benefits, which was a term we used earlier, and I'll show you what those are, and works very well with historic preservation regulations due to the transfer development rights. So before I said you have a regulation that says we want to see an architecturally appropriate amount of glass along the street front of transparency, Miami 21 says facades shall have a minimum of 70% of glass along the frontage, period, 70%. So you know what it is, you're going to design it that way, you come into the office, they check that box, boom, you can move forward. For all of the, and that's for other regulations. Your setbacks, very simple to read, and it tells you if you have a building that's a high zone next to a low zone, your setbacks have to increase a little bit more so that you don't impact the lower zone too much. So it's very simple and easy to move forward. and the regulations are more precise. So the previous process, you regulate use and density, a very, very difficult permitting process, and what was regulated about with the form was minimal. And that allowed you to end up with projects like this El Dorado, where it does not fit in with the community at all. It got approved, the planning department negotiated, the developer didn't agree. They went before a board, the board didn't care what the department recommended, and they approved it.
That was before the Miami 21 code. And the Miami 21 code went into effect in 2010. So this building was built before the code.
May 20th.
And what?
May 20, 2010.
May 22. So this building was built before May 20, 2010. Just because a new code comes in, it doesn't mean that the building has to be knocked down, right? But it's an example. We're going to show it as an example of what would not be allowed in Miami anymore, the city of Miami, because of the way that it does not engage with the rest of the neighborhood. If you were that person walking, you probably, might get hit by a car.
Lots of driveways,
right.
Not much shade trees. This parking lot doesn't fit in because everything else in the neighborhood is built like this up close to the street. So that building, when you're driving down 8th Street, just stands out like a sore thumb. So if you were developing in Miami 21, your building would look more like this, maybe a different architectural style, but you would have the building close to the street. We'd encourage shade structures so that if you're walking down the street, it's a much more comfortable environment. And then glass, like I said, 70% transparency along the street. And the idea of that is you have eyes on the street, you have people looking out on the street, so it's safer. And then he can look in and seeing what's being sold, so it encourages commerce, encourages sales, encourages a lot of public benefits to doing that.
So where did your parking go? Because they had it there.
You would still have parking, but it would be located on the backside. So you're just flipping the building. So rather than have this thing here, you'd have this here.
Experience of the pedestrian isn't walking in front of just a big giant parking lot. We're saying that the parking has to be shaded or lined so that it's a more urban, active experience where the pedestrian can interact with what's happening inside. It can look, it's exciting. It's not just walking past the big parking lot.
Would this El Dorado now be impacted by the non-conforming use?
It's a non-conforming building, so it's allowed to stay. There's nothing that tells them they have to build new. But if they were to do an addition, the addition would have to comply with the new code. So if they were going to do an addition to that, the addition would have to be located up here.
If someone were to buy the property and knock it down, they would have to build under the new code.
Yes.
Right.
And there are provisions, what's called act of God. If there's a hurricane that demolishes it, you have the right to rebuild it as it was if it was not a demolition due to your subdivision.
Were you saying that they couldn't build out directly in front of them? They would have to make it stand on its own?
There's limitations. It's very detailed. They could probably do a very limited expansion up against the building, but there's very, very limited. They can't just do whatever they want. Once you go beyond a certain threshold, then the new construction has to be built up front. It depends on the value of the building. 50% of the value of the building. Once you exceed the 50% of the value, everything needs to conform with new regulations.
And that could be different in a different municipality.
Yeah.
So in whatever municipality you're in, if the zoning code changes, it could be different how a non-conforming structure is handled. Yeah.
So in my zone, the form is the most important thing. Use and density is not as important, and the permitting process is even less
So what
important.
does that
It's
mean?
much simpler.
Use and density, form is important, but use and density isn't. What does that mean?
The idea behind a form-based code is if the building is developed in a proper way, what you do inside of that building is less important. It's still important, but not as important because the building mitigates the negative impacts of what you're doing.
So you can have one building that has offices in it, that has retail on the ground, parking, offices, and even residences on the top, and maybe even a hotel component. It could all be in one structure.
Like the building next door.
What?
Like the building next
Right,
door.
exactly. Instead of what would happen in a Euclidean zoning code where hotels would be in one spot, shopping would be in another spot, residences would be in another spot. Here, as long as the building looks the way that the city wants it to, it has the setbacks, it has the windows, it has the eyes on the street, it has the pedestrian activity, it has the parking lined or hidden. In some places in the city, they don't even require parking. then you're allowed to build it. So the idea is just like a return to urbanism before the car, where you could do everything in one location.
And I think it's more economically feasible to build mixed use, right?
I guess because you can withstand different economic factors. Because
Yeah.
if residential goes down, you still have the commercial base that can be boosted, that can withstand the downturn if you're a rental. So yeah, it's definitely a much better thing. There have been issues in the past where banks are getting more used to it, but banks originally didn't like loaning for those, and it was tough to get them done. But they're coming around.
Why the number 21?
21st century.
Okay. That, no,
Yeah.
maybe it's a question.
No, all questions are against Sebastian?
Was this change fueled by the population growth that we've seen in Miami?
Definitely, yeah. There was a lot of growth, a lot of development, and a lot of it was very bad. And I'll show. And yeah, the way it looked was awful, and a lot of people were complaining about it. So we needed to get that under.
And how many years again did it take to change the code?
It was about a 5-year process, just community meeting after community meeting, and dealing with developers, and dealing with property owners, and dealing with everybody, and it was a tough process, but it was actually a lot of fun, a lot of very interesting process.
I also check on the properties, it's land use and zoning, there are two different things. Having a lot of
Land use is in your comprehensive plan, and then the zoning is the zoning ordinance. Yeah, and you need to know both. Generally, your land use will be more general, it'll have general, very, very general, loose requirements, and then your zoning will be very, very specific.
The price are different, right?
What?
Like the price of the property, when you find like a house, and when you check the zoning, you can build like 4 or 5 apartments, like it's like a goal for the developers.
Right.
Like by FIU, the canal, those houses, right now, there's goal. Many developers, they want to buy them, they don't want to sell them, they're waiting for that.
Yeah, it adds that knowing the zoning, zoning is a major contributor to the determination of value of a piece of property. Martin.
I wanted to ask, here in Miami, the zoning has changed already for 6 years, and there's been some issues with some of the designations. Like people talk a lot about T5 and.
We're going to get into the
Okay.
to the designations. Yeah.
So another thing that they've incorporated is public benefits. You get
Does everybody know what public benefit means? No, because it's a term of art, so it just depends how it's defined in the city. Right?
Here we're not referring to economic development. Public benefits, well, we are in a way. But public benefits gives a property owner in a receiving area additional development rights, additional square footage, or additional height for providing a public benefit, whatever that public benefit is. So if you develop a very high-level green building, you can get extra square footage in the city of Miami. If you could have public benefits to address sea level rise. In Miami, you can get public benefits from historic preservation due to the Transfer Development Program. If you preserve open space or you provide open space, so build a park, build a public plaza, you can get additional development rights for that, and that's a public benefit open to the public. Providing infrastructure. Brickell City Center is going to incorporate, I believe, a fire station, so they're getting additional development rights for that. Workforce housing in the city of Miami. If you build affordable housing or workforce housing, you get additional square footage for doing that. And actually now there's another ordinance being proposed by the county for workforce housing. It's controversial, but it would apply to the cities, that would require any development that has more than 20 units to set aside 10% of the units for workforce housing, so the rents could not exceed a certain level. And it's in process, it's being discussed now, it's not in effect yet, but I saw some people had questions on how to address affordable housing, that is a real issue, and that's one of the options being considered right now. So those are different public benefits. So zones.
Honestly, maybe we should take a break. We've been going for hours straight. Just
Okay. Sure.
We're gonna take another 5-minute break.
Okay.
We're in a zone, like getting this done.
What if we don't do dinner tonight and just leave a little early?
That would be fine with me. We could take a vote. Do we wanna not do dinner tonight and leave a little earlier? Or is that good for you guys? What? Is that
We're on a
good
roll
for you?
here.
Helen?
Yeah.
You very hungry?
I can go over.
What?
Yeah, I know, I don't need to eat.
Okay.
We still have like a waste
Or whatever.
break though.
Yeah, we're having one now. We're having one right